So I basically I resist the temptation to give you an instant view of what I think Japan should do, and I'll rather ask some questions on a number of issues. To start with, this observation maybe that the crisis has changed the way we look at Japan. Before this crisis, there was a temptation to consider that Japan had made so many mistakes that it was only responsible for what had happened to the country, speaking economically. So that the mismanagement of the bubble, and thereafter the mismanagement of the adjustment to the burst of the bubble were something that could be attributable to a lack of boldness, to temptation to procrastinate, and that's the reading there was very much the word around about the crisis in Japan in the 90s and the early 2000s. Obviously now we've learned that home-made crises, self-made crises are not something Japan has a monopoly for. That not only actually the US, because we all speak about the subprime generated crisis and the consequences, but if you look more widely, you see that major real estate bubbles have taken place also in Europe, in the UK, in Ireland, in Spain. So many countries have also been successful at not spotting the risks to financial stability that were inherent in these real estate developments, believing self-serving stories about why this time is different and why this time the bubble is not really a bubble, only to find themselves in an extremely difficult situation and faced with an adjustment that is going to take a very long time. So I think now we look back and say, well, after all, should we learn from Japan? Should we learn from the experience of those years of crisis? And also, should we consider that Japan, having learned in the past itself, maybe is telling us something about the way out of this current crisis? I think there are a couple of issues there. There is the speed of the response to the banking crisis. I think we have learned from the slowness of the Japanese response that it's important to go fast. Everybody compares Sweden and Japan. Say Sweden got it right in the 90s because they were very fast in recognizing the extent of the losses. Unfortunately, I don't think we're learning the full lesson, and we're still in Europe, for example, not very fast at recognizing the extent of the losses in the banking sector. Then there is a question of the strength of the response, and here I think we've learned that there was an important dimension that was to embark into unconventional policy without waiting for too long. So everybody has done it to a different extent, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing some signs of recovery, and certainly we're not on the track that some people feared a year ago, where there was a fear that we would go down back in the 1930s, and actually the numbers were very frightening because they were very much like the numbers we've seen in the 1930s. One of the reasons we're now on a different track is that there has been this response. So again, we learned. The next question is more difficult. It's the question of the exit. And how fast, in what order, with what kind of dependence on events should we plan for the exit. Here, clearly the experience of Japan in the past has been that the plans for exit were not very clear, at least were not very much fulfilled, and that there was a tendency to add a new stimulus plan to the previous stimulus plan. What I think we've learned, what is being tried, is to have a clear exit strategy in place. This exit strategy for fiscal and for monetary policy is more a European obsession than a US obsession, I should say. In the US, clearly, both the administration and the Federal Reserves are more relaxed. They are concentrate on fighting the downturn and don't think too hard about the next step. In Europe, we tend to think about the next step. Maybe we're too fast in considering the next step, and we have too much hopes in the fact that the recovery will be strong enough to sustain growth in spite of the removal of the stimulus. So here we're in exactly the same boat, with some slight differences, however. One difference is that clearly Japan can count much more than the rest of the world, and many other countries. They count much more on the fact that domestic savers keep their savings at home and are willing to finance the budget deficit for a long time. It may not be the case in the rest of the world. It may especially not be the case in Europe, where there's a lot of capital mobility. And therefore, the question of for how long public debts are sustainable may be more acute in Europe than elsewhere. We are now seeing downgrades of public debt in some countries. The top of the list now is Greece, where markets have started reacting. That could be something that may have wider repercussion if some countries in Europe face difficulties rolling over the debt on the market, because as you know, those things are prone to some sort of contagion effect. When markets start worrying about a particular type of crisis, then they ask the same question the world over. The second question is that clearly the regional dimension matters, and here in Japan, you're in a region where growth has rebounded. You're in a region where emerging countries are going back, especially China, are going back on track, which means that I have no time to discuss now, but clearly the implications are not the same in Japan and in